Well, hello there. Welcome to another season of Cult Life Podcast. We've been off air for a while. Of course, 2022, we took a bit of a break. But I've got a very special guest on the very first episode of the new season. To those of you who've probably seen a documentary on Netflix called Orgasm Inc., I've got Ruwan with me. And if you watch the documentary, you'll recognize the face and his story in there. So welcome, Ruwan. It's good to have you on the Cult Life Podcast on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Robin. Nice to meet you.
Absolutely, great. So, Ruwan, a bit of background in terms of where you grew up, how you. Let's start of where did you grow up?
All the way at the beginning. Okay.
All the way at the beginning.
I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. My parents were immigrants. I grew up pretty shy, and I think maybe these are things that had me from an early age seeking some sort of answer, seeking some sort of solution. You know, I got really obsessed with personal development as a teenager, and it helped me a lot. And it did become my obsession and later my career. And my cult experience was one of these like big chapters in my journey.
Interesting point there that you mentioned. You know, you at the point in stage in your life, I think we all go through that, where you're seeking some sort of trying to make sense of the world and where you're going and what's your purpose, you know, and a lot of these self-help groups tend to try and, you know, answer those questions in terms of what's the bigger purpose, what's your purpose, you know, in the group. So I think we all of us go through that at some stage, and I think it forms the platform and the background for a lot of us to actually get drawn into groups that might not seem sinister at the beginning, and then end up being sinister. And you know, I'm just trying to relate it to my experience as a former Jehovah's Witness.
Were you born into the Witnesses, or you joined later?
I was basically, when I joined, I started attending when I was about 10 years old with my father. I got baptized as a Jehovah's Witness, you know, when I was 13 years old. Of course, you know, that's way too young to make such a decision. And of course, suffered the consequences. And I explained, you know, I wrote 2 books about my journey through the Jehovah's Witnesses and the subsequent, you know, consequences I experienced leaving the group. So, yeah, I wasn't born in, but I was very young when I got drawn into the group and indoctrinated into the teachings and you know, so yeah. So let's talk about why most self-help groups, Ruwan, end up being culty, despite, as we said, despite the good intentions.
Well, yeah, I think there's different layers to this. I think on a kind of just simply on the marketing side, they are businesses, right? And you know, I think there's many people, including myself, who work in personal development, who obviously want to help people. We also want to make money. Like no one wants to work for free. And it is the truth, whether it's recognized consciously or not, that certain people will pay a lot more than other people. Like to your point, like about being young and confused, like when I was 23, which is when I joined, almost all of my friends had what we now call a quarter life crisis, right? You don't really know what to do. Maybe college didn't prepare you well. You're looking for answers. You don't have a lot to lose. But I think I was a little bit more willing to take big risks than others because I was in a little bit more angst, if you will, right? I felt like I wasn't giving up so much by trying something really weird. And maybe I was more welcoming of like a more volatile life path. And so obviously if there's a person like me and a person who's not willing to take those leaps of faith, obviously I'm the person that's going to be targeted because I'm more willing to put my life savings down, which is what happened, you know?
Right. No, correct. You know, it's interesting because as you say, you know, and then you get the self-help and trying to improve yourself, and then you get drawn into this. So how did you, firstly, let's get the organization's name clear, because the documentary on Netflix that you featured in is called Orgasm Inc. But the actual actual organization or the program? What was it called?
One Taste Incorporated. They still exist.
One Taste. Yeah, One
I
Taste
think they
Incorporated.
rebranded, but they still exist. And it's an organization, it's a health and wellness organization, was that focused on female sexuality.
Right.
And I found out about them because I was, again, obsessed with personal development. I obsessively watched TED Talks throughout college,
Right.
Kind of looking for answers, but, trying to improve myself. And the founder had this TED Talk called Orgasm, the Cure to the Hunger in the Western Woman. So, of course, as a young man, I saw Orgasm, TED Talk, I clicked on it, and I did find it very moving. I found that, she was speaking about intimacy on an emotional level that as a young man, I never really considered. I realized like, oh, wow, I am really lacking and starving for connection, honestly. And here's a group that offers that. So it was an obvious thing to attend their events once I was able to.
Right. The founder's name is Nicole
Daedone.
Daedone. Yeah, so Nicole Daedone. And as you say, interesting because I think they turned a sex practice into a spiritual practice, basically, from what I gathered on watching the documentary. And
it comes from a lineage of practices that go back into the 60s and into with some roots in Tantra and like European mysticism and things. Like she didn't invent it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, yeah, she just turned it into an incorporation, a corporation, basically, and a cult, basically. So, and this is quite interesting because with most self-help gurus and these types of cults, they patriarchal in nature, right? Most of these things we all know when you watch television and you watch these documentaries, most of these things are patriarchal. There's always a male heading a group, and drawing people in. And this was different because this was a female-headed organization, a female cult, which was basically quite different to what we are used to. And that was a fascinating thing for me while watching the documentary because we very seldom hear how, females actually head up this organization and become this matriarchal figure to the members or the followers. And that was quite interesting, that dynamic. Do you think that dynamic was also a lure for many males in terms of the practices?
For sure, and women too. I think that's actually, I wish the documentary stressed a little bit more about the social dynamics and how they were so different. Because the power structure really ran kind of like the way women organize, not the way that men organize. Like if you look at patriarchal organizations, there's usually a very top-down visual hierarchy, whereas everything in One Taste, there still was a power hierarchy, but it was much more subtle. No one was ever commanded to do things. Like one of their tenets was living by desire. It was very female friendly and inviting to women, which attracted women because it was very in alignment with feminism and liberality and other things that are popular in cities and feel good to be a part of, like you're helping women, right? And then on the male side, there's like this social aspect of like, no man, this is before Me Too, but no man wanted to be seen as like anti-women. It seems great to help women's rights and women's freedom. And at the same time, when you have a matriarchal organization and a female-led culture, there's a lot more women around. So as a man, that's also attractive. And that was actually part of One Taste's marketing strategy to basically get as many young, attractive women in as possible because everyone else would follow.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it was a very structured and laid out strategy in terms of how to get people in, how to draw the young men into the organization. And a good point that you made, I think the woman empowerment aspect of this organization was a big draw card. Feeling, making women feel that much empowered.
And you can see this in other groups. I mean, I don't want to go in a political direction, but if you look at some of the big movements of our era, even the ones that have been exposed to be pretty power hungry and all about getting money to the founders, a lot of them, like the biggest one of our era, was driven by a very positive civil rights movement, right? Like no one is against. I mean, I don't know if I should say it or not, but like no one is against that idea. You know, Black Lives Matter is very culty, very culty.
Yeah, yeah.
But who's against? Of course, Black Lives Matter. Like everyone can agree with that statement, unless you're truly racist. But then they do other things, but it's hidden behind the civil rights, social justice thing.
Correct. Yeah, I like that. That's a very interesting point you made there, and you touched on the monetary aspect of the organization. And I think when I did some research on the organization, there was the tiers and the in terms of the levels of you're paying for a level and then going up in the levels. How did that work, Ruwan?
So their sales funnel, if you will, started with a $10 intro event that was held every week in the major cities. Because they had a presence, at least when I was joining, they were creating a presence in New York. They already had one in San Francisco, Los Angeles, London, and some other minor cities. They have these events. These events were very well structured as sales events to get people to feel comfortable opening up. They actually descend from another group called Morehouse that did these things called mark groups that were a little bit more explicit in how they were, mark as in, what's the word? The person being manipulated, essentially.
Right.
From there, and they were very eye-opening events for me because I lived in New York City my whole life. I'd never gotten in a group of strangers and bared my soul to people. And there's like a high of that vulnerability. From there, they would sell you the 1-day how to own class, which was their orgasmic meditation practice, which I still feel totally worth the money, right? As far as like a front end product that delivered something, I found it very useful. And I think many people do, both men and women. And then from there, the price tag gets higher and higher and the benefits become a little bit more abstract. The next leap that I took was the coaching program. It's a year-long program on how to basically be a life coach that taught orgasmic principles. That was $15,000. And then beyond that, there were other things like a $40,000 2-week intensive, $60,000 a year for unlimited membership. And
wow. Wow. Because, interesting that you mentioned that $60,000 a year membership. I think in 2017, it mentioned that the revenue was about $12 million.
Yeah, and there were salespeople that were responsible for over 7 figures a year in sales, and they worked on less than a minimum wage. Like no one was getting commission. Like they weren't doing it because they were money hungry the way, or money motivated the way a typical salesperson was. They really believed in the message. Like, and when I worked for them, I really believed like we are helping the world become connected. Like we were saving the world from loneliness. And of course, that's a very motivating feeling.
Correct. Totally agree. And then on that point, there's the aspect of celebrity in terms of how this organization started using celebrities to influence, and to portray this and to really get on board. And I think they used quite a few Hollywood celebrities to endorse some of these products, right?
Yeah, it's basically following a model of Scientology. Like Scientology is basically immovable because of the celebrity endorsements. And yeah, I think, Onetaste was moving in that direction. I think Nicole took a lot of notes on other organizations like even Bikram Yoga. We modeled a lot after Bikram Yoga and how it was able to spread. Actually, everyone in Onetaste, if you were like deep in Onetaste, you did Bikram Yoga every day. Like that was like one of our daily practices.
Yeah, very much because as I was watching and I was looking at how this was outlined, and I really started seeing the similarities in terms of Scientology and the playbook. She definitely took there's a Scientology playbook in terms of what she did there. But and one thing about Nicole was she could read people. That's what I've picked up. She could read people and manipulate people to the to her desires, basically, mostly, I think, and to get them under the her influence. Because looking at, the excerpts and the clips, you could actually see how these people, and probably yourself, was hanging on her every word, just basically getting enthralled and just mesmerized by what she was saying and what she was teaching. And so that influence, that I don't want to call it, it's probably undue influence that was, which a lot of these cult members put over their followers. It's very subtle. You don't realize it until you take that step back.
Yeah, because no one's going to follow a leader or a guru who doesn't have charisma, right? Like they have, it's kind of a prereq. And one thing I kind of wish they stressed it more in the documentary as well is that in One Taste, one of the things that we really learned collectively was empathy. Like even the orgasmic meditation practice, it was all about sensing what your partner wanted. And the higher ranking people in One Taste did this better and better and better. Nicole was the best, where she could really sense your feelings accurately. And then she would tell you what you were feeling sometimes before you realized it. So of course there's like something that seems so magical about that. Like, how did you know what I was feeling? But it's a skill that we can learn. Anyone can really develop it. She just had it at a very high level.
That's so true. Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you think, and I want to ask you, I mean, you've been in there, was there a certain language and terms that you guys used just within the cult? Because that's one of the identifying marks of a lot of these cults. There were certain phrases and terms that were used.
Of course, there's many terms that mostly invented by Nicole, and then it would when people were going in, they would kind of use it in a cheeky way, because some of the words like were just replacements for other more common words, like they weren't necessary. Some of the words were like unique terms that maybe were better at describing our experience. But the deeper you went in, the less you used it cheekily, and more you start to, like, over time, you could see a person stop or start taking that word more seriously. Like, for example, there's one term she used called tumessing, which she borrowed from erotica. Tumessing usually means engorgement of something.
Okay.
But in One Taste language, tumessing meant you're overwhelmed. Like, it's like you're too full of sensations, like you're tumessed. And anytime someone used it for the first time, it's like, oh yeah, I'm feeling like it's almost like using like a comical way, like, yeah, I'm feeling too messed. But then people start using it as a regular term, like, oh, I'm too messed right now, or this is too messing. And I notice nowadays, obviously, I don't use this term because no one knows what it means in my normal life. But if I feel overwhelmed or if something is like irritating, that is one of the words that pops into my head. Like that is incepted in my head of like a way of expressing myself. And that is, as you pointed out, every cult does this because language creates reality.
Correct. That's so true. And you'll see it across all of them. They have their certain phrases and languages, that that only those cult members and followers know and use. Very interesting. So your awakening, or when did you start realizing, or how did you start pulling back from the group, or eventually leave the organization?
Yeah, well, there are different layers, because even in 2013 when I was joining, or even 2012, if you search One Taste on Google, the third autofill was cult. So like I knew that there was something going on. I knew they were strange. I really felt, and I felt that the pros were outweighing the cons. I was willing to take a kind of risky life path. But maybe 6 or 7 months in, when I started working for them, like I transitioned from student to employee, of course I saw some things that were questionable, like how they mixed sex with sales, how they used like very high pressure sales and, kind of got into people's heads and controlled their entire social lives. But when you're in long enough, and that it became my world at that point, I've been living in the residence. It was like 24/7. This is my reality. It's easier to reframe your feelings. Like I felt a little sick sometimes when I saw the way they did sales, but then it's very easy to flip it and be like, oh, this is my resistance to my growth. Or like, that was one of the reframes offered. So maybe a year in, it became clear to me that I wanted to gain as much as I could from the organization. They did enough questionable things that I didn't want to stay for life. And I also recognized, like, some people, it seemed, got trapped. Like they put all of their money in and they could never leave. And I never crossed that line where I wanted to do that. Like I wanted to gain as much as I could and then move on. I was kind of looking at it as like graduate school. This is like my, this is my education in emotional intelligence. Then I want to move on. I don't want to be stuck in school forever. Yeah, so I knew I was going to leave at some point.
Okay.
I left after 2
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. And I think, what you're explaining there is I get that question quite often too, is, what made you leave, or what was the straw that broke the camel's back for you? And I always tell people it's a gradual process. It's not an instant, when you leave organizations like these, as you say, you see the pros, you see the cons, but when the cons start outweighing the pros, and you see people start getting hurt, and some questionable practices. So it's a gradual process, that takes you out of the cult or the organization. So as I say, it's not an immediate snap your fingers and you're out of there. It takes some time, because you start unlearning, and you start questioning, and you start thinking about things that you've seen and experienced, and it starts affecting your psyche, of course. And I think, as you say, that's exactly what happens to a lot of us when we leave organizations like that.
Yeah, and I think that the realizations happen a long time before you're able to pull the trigger, because you have all of these pressures. Especially, these were my best friends. I've been living with them. I've been meditating together. We've been doing all sorts of stuff. So to have this retractive thought. Of course, I suppressed it at first. Just like, if you have something to say against your family, you don't necessarily want to just spit it out. You think about it, you ruminate, you question whether you're the bad person. In a cult, obviously, it's heightened.
Right. And just on that point, because I wanted to ask, now that you've left the group, and of course there's people that have left as well, many others, and some of your friends are still in there. You were best friends, you lived with these people. Do they see you as what we call in religious terms an apostate, or somebody who's not to be spoken to? Because look, you've appeared in the documentary dissing the organization, and talking about your experiences. Is that a factor in Onetaste?
Oh, I'm sure. I don't know exactly, because I don't speak to anybody, but
Okay.
Even when I was in the organization, whenever someone left, especially someone influential or well-liked in the organization, if they left, there was kind of a protocol that we went through as a group, where we would kind of grieve for them leaving, but then we would, some leader would point out like how their demons got the best of them, and we should avoid them because, we'll be poisoned. And then we kind of feel sorry for them, but then we also feel contempt for them. And there's no being friends. Like, especially if someone was influential. If someone was just a student and they come in and they go, fine. But like, if they were like an employee, if they were a leader in the community, they had to be demonized. Otherwise, people might follow them. They're a liability. And I'd seen that enough times on the inside end that I kind of knew that was going to happen to me on the way out. I tried to do what I could to prevent that by leaving in a nice way, but there's you can't leave in a nice way, because if they validate me as a human being as I leave, they're validating that there's another path other than theirs.
Correct. I always say, you don't leave an organization, a high control group, unscathed. You never. Be it religious, self-help, all these commercial entities too that act like cults. So you don't leave unscathed. There's always something that, they demonize you, call you apostates, or and that's a theme. That's one of, and when you look at, I don't know if you've researched Steve Hassan's bite model. He's a cult guru. He was a member of the Moonies, and when he left the organization, he's one of the foremost cult experts. And it's called the bite model, where you can actually, it stands for behavior control, information control, of course, time control, and emotional control. And T is for thought control. So all those groups fit that bite model, and you can tick off, and under all those aspects. And Steve Hassan just breaks it down. It could be religious. It could be self-help. It could be commercial groups. Once they tick those boxes, there's something not right. Yeah,
and a lot of people ask me, like, why couldn't they just not do the cult stuff? Because they were profitable business. Like, why couldn't they just do that? And I think that's an interesting inquiry that maybe we can't answer in one sentence. But I think part of it is the marketing thing. Like, you don't get dedicated people who just like going to the gym, right? Or like going to
Correct.
some class. Like people become diehard when their thoughts and time and information is controlled, emotions are controlled. And then also I think there is something like primal and maybe dark about human nature of like, and maybe not even that dark. It's like we evolved to live in these tight clans where there is a chief and we're all really immersed in each other's lives. And there's something that feels very natural about that. So I think, you know, as you kind of recreate that in a cult dynamic, something does kind of feel good about really creating a strong us versus them reality. And like really, because, you know, honestly, you know, I have good friends now, you know, it's different, the level of intimacy, like, and I haven't really had that where you're that involved in each other's lives, and there is something fun about that and enjoyable on some primal level, I think.
Yeah. Was it hard for you to basically readjust into normal life when you left the organization or society?
For sure, I think my following year to 2 years were really hard to adjust. I mean, I found real life to be kind of boring compared to cult life. That was the hardest part. I also kind of, you know, I just didn't know what was going on in pop culture at all. I didn't know who the mayor was of New York, even though I was in New York. Like I had just become detached. You know, the real world didn't feel real. The one taste world is what felt real during those 2 years.
Yeah. And I think that's, and I'm just talking to a lot of us that have left the organization, it takes time to readjust into normal society, because as you say, you got to unlearn these languages, you know, you got to reprogram your brain, you know, that a lot of things that happened within the group and the way we interacted with each other was not actually normal, you know. One of the things I always mention on my channel is because the Jehovah's Witnesses see themselves as the only true religion, right? Everybody else is wrong on this, right? So we're right. You're right, no matter what you say. So I had to adjust when I left. You know, I had to, in terms of understand that that's not normal. You know, and arguing and having different opinions and views to other people is okay, but you can still be friends. So we can follow a different, you know, life path and have differing views, but we can still have a good time together, you know, and not let that affect our friendship, you know. And that was one of the things for me when I came out of the organization, just to, you know, trying to readjust. And it takes time. It takes time to unlearn. I mean, people go through therapy as well, you know, to really just get over those. The indoctrination.
One thing that kind of disillusioned me was that I kind of felt like, you know, conventional world or real world also is a little bit arbitrary in the social norms. Like I was like, you know, it didn't really feel more real. It's just like, oh, there's one taste and then there's what like normal people do. It's more popular, but is it any different? Like the phrases people use or the norms of how people speak to each other in New York City or something else. And you know, for a while I was very jaded where like every kind of group, even loose groups and like, you know, normal life, they all kind of seemed like another cult to me. And it's just like, okay, which language do I want to use, right? Like which pop culture, subculture do I want to be a part of? Which political allegiance do I want to speak like, you know? And, you know, and honestly, I still feel that a little bit, but I realize you kind of have to be a part of something. Otherwise you're living alone on an island, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. No man is an island. What, in terms of what you do now, Ruwan, after leaving the organization, where can people find you? What do you practice? Are you working, social media, so forth?
Yeah, I have a podcast focused on men's personal development called Ruwando Podcast. All of my work is on Substack, ruwando.substack.com, including my cult memoir. I decided to serialize my entire tale of being in there. It's part young man's hero's journey, but obviously I share all the cult details as well. And that's also at ruwando.substack.com.
Fantastic. I will put all of those links in the description box so people can find you and go look at your work and see what you do. So that'll be good. Ruwan, I think it's been a fantastic chat and really eye-opening in terms of just wanting to spend some time with you and just talk about your experience and how it affected you and how this organization works. I know people will probably go and watch the documentary on Netflix called Orgasm Inc. So go and watch it. It's very eye-opening. It's a very really, really sometimes sad tale of what happens within groups like this. They start off with a as you say, self-help and wanting to improve people's lives, and then deteriorate into hurting people and really affecting people's psyche so much. And we've seen that happen. So much appreciated. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. And I'll put Ruwan's links in the description box, and you can go and check him out wherever he's active and support the man. Support the man. I'm looking forward to your memoir. As you say, has it been released yet?
Yeah, I'm releasing a chapter a week, so
okay, great.
A bit of it's already published.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic! I'm looking forward to reading that. It'll be good. Ruwan, thanks for joining me, and until next time, we'll talk again soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks, Robert.
Bye for now.